This presentation is about mental health treatments, a little bit of history, and it's for both personal and professional referrals. This will cover treatment modalities and some models. Really, this is truly an overview. It's a brief look at a little history as well as a few current methods of treatment and various interventions used for mental health issues. I'll be covering more in a subsequent PowerPoint. So when we talk about treatment, we're talking about things like we want to find out what's going on with a person's background, what's happening in their emotional health, what kind of thoughts are they having, what kind of actions are they expressing. Really, the focus is on unresolved problems and issues from the past. Treatment is really about healing past wounds and developmental blocks, or the thought is that harmful and dysfunctional patterns will continue. There are a great deal of empirically supported types of treatment, and there are some that work really well that don't have a lot of evidence backing behind them for lots of different reasons, which I'm not going to get into in this or the next PowerPoint. So I'll start out with psychodynamic. This is some, psychoanalytic therapies are some of the oldest, of course. Some basic assumptions around this are that causation underlines behavior, that unconscious thoughts, feelings, and beliefs are at the root of all mental health issues. We have unconscious influences. Those are being aware of unconscious thoughts that motivate behavior is key. Interpersonal relationships are internalized, so attachment figures are internalized. They shape the relationships and organize our developing personality. When we talk about psychological conflict, this is inevitable. The thoughts, feelings, and desires cause internal conflict and can undermine healthy development. The premise is also that everyone has defense mechanisms. They are meant to protect the ego and help reduce feelings related to anxiety. When we talk about complex meaning that underlines behavior, those are the things that are at the root of symptomatic behavior and mostly below the level of conscious awareness. The therapeutic relationship is truly one of the most powerful aspects in psychoanalysis and in psychodynamic types of therapies. Of course, some of the bigger names in this, of course, are Sigmund Freud, which I've talked a great deal about, so I'm not going to go into it too much about him. Adler, Jung, Karen Horney, Erik Erikson, John Bowlby, Mary Ainsworth, Harry Stack Sullivan, Stephen Mitchell, and Heinz Kohut. I'll talk a little bit more about some of these that I haven't talked so much about before in previous PowerPoints. So when we talk about Freudian-based psychoanalysis, the thing to remember is that so many have been left out here in this presentation. This would be hours and hours and hours long. One thing to remember is that all of the people that kind of followed after Freud and Brewer and some of the other originators of, the earliest creation of what we now know as mental health therapy, many of these people then went on to create often competing views of psychoanalysis. So the view of human nature in this Freudian-based psychoanalysis is that biology and childhood are really some of the most important things, that we go through predictable stages of development and we all struggle to find balance. There's these personality structures. These have been mentioned in previous PowerPoints. Id is about instincts and bodily processes. Ego is the result of separation and individuation. And the superego is about rules and guidelines, and it really helps to curtail the id. In stages of development, when we talk about Sigmund Freud, we're thinking about things like anal, oral, phallic, latency, and genital stages. The goal truly is about equilibrium between the id and the superego. So like I said, some of the big names are Freud, Adler, and Jung. Again, many people continued to work with Freud, but many broke off and developed their own ideas and thoughts about psychology and the study of human beings. Some created their own schools of psychology, and many contributed immensely to the field. So when we talk about Sigmund Freud, the focus here oftentimes is really about sexual drives and libido. Alfred Adler, It's about goals and behaviors, and Jung really developed a lot about philosophy, religion, and metaphysics. He pulled all of those things into his work and the creation of kind of his track, if you will, of psychoanalysis. So Adler, people continue to this day to study his philosophy. There are Adlerian schools of psychology, many in the cities around the United States. There is, I think, there's one in Chicago. I know there's one here in the Twin Cities metropolitan area. Individual psychology is really what he conceptualized. So replacing Freudian sexual drive and the libido with the drive for power, superiority, and to become a fully functioning adult. Adler was truly interested in social work. It's truly important to and foundational for what he does. So his kind of concept is that people have a need for significance, self-worth, and social involvement. Some of the primary goals of therapy are empowerment, social involvement, and relationships. Family constellations and birth order are some very familiar interventions that are Adlerian in origin. He also talked about private logic. This is our belief about ourselves and our place in the world. Understanding this as a goal of therapy, faulty logic, and what stems from this is truly the issue to be identified and dealt with. He did stuff with dream analysis, earliest recollections, priorities, and ways of being. They all help to develop self-awareness, current life issues, and behavior patterns that reflect life. Moving on to post and neo-Freudian. We'll start out with Carl Jung in analytic psychology. The idea was to help people integrate and raise consciousness. The thoughts that are our conscious mind is the ego and persona, and is made up of two attitudes of extrovert and introvert with four functions: to think, feel, sense, and intuit. We have our unconscious mind, which consists of the collective unconscious related to the greater human experience. And then there is the personal unconscious, which is our own experiences. Some of the goals and stages of therapy are to make the unconscious conscious, acceptable, and meaningful, to resolve inner conflicts, balance and integrate. There are truly four stages in therapy in this school: catharsis and emotional cleansing, elucidation, education, and transformation. Moving on to ego psychology. We talk about Karen Horney. She challenged biological determinism, that men are the standard and that women are less than or subordinate to all things male. Harry Stack Sullivan focused on current behavior and interactions, and that anxiety is the central motivating force in human behavior, causing us to seek security to decrease tension. Anna Freud, who was Sigmund Freud's daughter, hugely influential in the creation of child psychoanalysis and developmental issues. So when we talk about ego development, self-image, and relationships, these are key. There's a drive for security and to resolve repressed inner conflicts, to free up constructive forces. Ego psychology was influential in the creation of humanistic psychology, and the beliefs here set the stage for relational psychology. Now, with object relations, Melanie Klein is an originator of play therapy and the use of free association in adults to connect with their inner wounded child self. John Bowlby, of course, I've talked about him as the originator of attachment theory. Harry Stack Sullivan was influential here, and Stephen Mitchell was key in integrative and relational forms of psychoanalysis. The idea was to attend to the past by exploring early relationships. Repair is done through the client-clinician in a relationship or therapeutic alliance. Projective identification is essential in treatment. This allows the internalized object or other to be projected onto the therapist as a way to explore the earliest dynamics of relational rupture that did not get repaired. Some other key elements are being aware of resistance, which keeps painful memories, emotions, and fantasies buried in the unconscious for protection. There is countertransference, which is about the therapist being aware of what is being triggered in themselves as a result of the client projecting their internalized object or other. Assessments are used, and interpretation is a primary route to change. Self-psychology was really brought about by Heinz Kohut. He developed self-psychology and was one of the first to write extensively about narcissism. A lot of empathy, a lot of self-image, and current experiences. With brief psychodynamic, this is a fixed number of sessions which are established at the outset. The focus is on a single conflict. They discourage regression, which is encouraged in many other forms of psychoanalysis. The emphasis is still on early relationships as a source of the current problem. Now, emotion focused, we get into things like humanism, person-centered, Rogerian therapy. So Carl Rogers was influenced a great deal by Alfred Adler. Familiar Rogerian phrase is unconditional positive regard. The focus is on empathy and congruence between client and therapist. You focus on emotions, not background or cognitions. The belief is that people are basically good with a natural tendency towards growth, and that our conditions of worth are formed by important people in our earliest years. Some goals of therapy is to facilitate people's trust and their ability to be in the present moment. Gestalt therapy was developed by Fritz Perls. His work is a combination of existential and person-centered. He was influenced by Karen Horney and Wilhelm Reich, who is considered the father of somatic psychology. Experiences in the here and now are a big part of the focus. It's on bodily sensation or the felt sense of things. There is value placed on emotions and experiences over thoughts. Some goals of therapy are to work with the emotions as a way to help the client access, identify, understand, and regulate themselves. When we talk about existential therapy, Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, James, Frankl, May, Bugenthal, and Yalom are some big names. Exploration of the universal issues that people face, such as death, isolation, meaninglessness, freedom, and responsibility. Postmodern or constructivist approaches. These types are therapeutic interventions and conceptualizations that are focused on holistic, diverse, and multicultural facets. You see the clinician as a facilitator, with therapy really being bi-directional. When we talk about narrative therapy, people are interpretive beings is the big thought process. It is truly an exploration, deconstruction, and revision of problematic stories that we tell ourselves. Since humans are interpretive beings, our perceptions create our reality, and when we change our perceptions, we change our life. In solution-focused therapy, this is generally brief, around 10 sessions. They have something called the miracle question, which is, if you waved a magic wand, what would change or get better or be different? There is the use of metaphor and things like paradoxical interventions. Seeks solutions, not focused on problems. The therapist using this type of treatment see complaints as involving behavior that stems from the client's worldview. Now, when we talk about feminist, there is no single feminist theory. Instead, it is shaped by tenets. The focus is on egalitarian, inclusiveness, truly embraces meaning and connection. Thought-focused treatment systems. So a primary developer of this is Albert Ellis. He developed rational emotive therapy, REBT is what it's oftentimes abbreviated as. Self-acceptance is important. The belief is that emotional disturbances are the result of irrational thinking and life experiences. Some goals of therapy are to recognize, identify, and respond to dysfunctional thoughts and to learn skills that promote rational thinking, which leads to greater happiness and self-acceptance. A lot of use of inventories, assessments, tasks, or homework. Moving on to Aaron Beck, he developed cognitive therapy. The belief is that dysfunctional thinking is at the root of all issues, so understanding the client's history, development, and background are important. Goals of therapy is to recognize and correct errors in information processing. There are 4 levels of thinking in cognitive therapy: automatic, intermediate, core beliefs, and schemas. These tend to be very brief sessions, 6 to 14. Action-focused treatment systems, the focus is on behavior change. Actions and behaviors are synonymous, affect, and are intertwined with thoughts and emotions. Some of the assumptions are that about genetics and behavior. It's a big part of the processing and contextualization in these types of treatment interventions. Experiences are an important piece as well. Other assumptions include seeing all behavior as learned. So this is where modeling, conditioning, and reinforcement come into play. The main goal of therapy is to understand and change behavior. It should be based on systematic, empirical evidence with a focus on the present. So Skinner, talked about him. He developed applied behavioral analysis. Pavlov, most of us know a little bit about Ivan Pavlov. Neo-behaviorism is where he kind of came in. Bandura developed social learning theory, and the goal of this type of therapy is to see how the environment influences behavior and to see that behavior influences the environment. The goal is to extinguish maladaptive behaviors and help people learn new behaviors. So Ellis and Beck got together and kind of combined some of the work that they did and came up with cognitive behavioral therapy, oftentimes referred to as CBT, which is a very popular form of treatment. Micum developed cognitive behavioral modification with 3 assumptions. There is constructive narrative, that reality is a product of personal meaning. There is information processing, which is about negative emotions and distorted thoughts, creating distorted reality, and conditioning, for which modeling and mental rehearsal affect cognitive change. Lazarus kind of looked at a whole bunch of things, multimodal, bringing lots of different pieces together, all still focused really on kind of some of those same similar assumptions as the others. So when we talk about kind of some others, if you will, these are really forms of therapy that are used a great deal right now. So dialectic behavioral therapy, DBT, was developed by Marshall Linehan. The goals of therapy is to develop dialectic thinking, which is basically a way to look at reality. Also to learn and practice skills that result in emotion regulation, reduce suffering, and improve relationships. This type of intervention uses a lot of skill building and support from the therapist. Acceptance and commitment therapy was developed by Stephen Hayes. It's based on relational frame therapies, which is about how language and cognitions can become entangled, resulting in internal struggles. Some goals of therapy is to help clients accept cognitions and emotions that are outside of their control. The use of meditation and other types of mindfulness practices are integral to this work, which brings us then to mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. Now, John Kabat-Zinn founded mindfulness-based stress reduction, or MBSR, upon which this type of therapy is based. So some of the goals is ultimately to help people stay in the present moment. With reality therapy, which was developed by William Glasser, it's philosophically based with an emphasis on self-determination. Some goals of therapy is to help people take responsibility for both the positive and the negative things in their life, thereby gaining control over their lives by making better choices. There are 5 basic needs that include belonging, power and achievement, fun, freedom, and survival. Now, just kind of rounding it off here, we've of course got family systems approaches, and these are generally about how the family creates, contributes to, and perpetuates issues. There's brief, of course, which then it's just a few sessions, 10, maybe 15 sessions. There's solution-focused family therapy, which is very similar to solution-focused therapy for individuals. Action-oriented, same kind of thing. Still really, it's just about what's going on in the family. There are structured family therapies, emotion-focused, here and now, and some people that went on to develop some family systems approaches, Alfred Adler, Bowen, Mnuchin, Satir, and Whitaker. So in summary, as I stated in the beginning, this is just a brief look at some of the various types of therapy, the modalities, interventions used in the past and currently. The most of this information came out of Selective and Effective Therapies Treatments, a comprehensive systematic guide to treating mental disorders by Lori Reichenberg and Linda Seligman.